everybody, and welcome back to the channel again. So today I'm going to discuss and talk about what I think are the top 10 tools for the DIYer. So this isn't just relating to woodworking, this is general DIY. I'm going to give you my list of top 10 tools in no particular order. And also what tools I think you should buy, how much I think you should spend, and what to generally avoid. So the first one is a saw. You need some sort of saw to be able to cut wood or plastic or anything like that. You need a saw, and a saw of all things is something you just shouldn't buy cheaply. You should always get a good brand like Beko or Irwin or Stanley. Always, as with any tools, buy the best that you can afford. But a good saw like this is only about £6, £6 or £7. So it just isn't worth buying a cheap one for all the hassle and frustration. You're as well just getting a good one. And if, depending on what sort of work you're doing, you might want to get quite a coarse toothed saw. So saws are generally referred to as first fix and second fix. So first fix means it's quite a coarse blade. It's meant for rough work such as joists, stud framing, rafters, things like that. First fix tends to be round about 7 or 8 teeth per inch. And then the second fix saws tend to be around 10 teeth per inch. So it's a bit finer blade, and that's for slightly finer work such as door linings, architraves, interior doors, cutting interior doors, and just finer work basically. So the saw is the first, I think, essential tool. Next thing, well, you need a pencil, something to mark with, a pencil or a pen. Preferably a pencil if you're working with wood, and keep the pencil sharp. You can check out my video on several different ways to sharpen pencils, but always make sure you've got a nice sharp point in the pencil. So always have a pencil. And the next thing is a combination square. If you can afford it, buy a combination square and a tri-square. So this is a tri-square. You also get a framing square, but don't go too crazy with it all. If you can afford all three and you've got work for all three, you're going to be using them, then brilliant. But if you can only afford one or two, then definitely make it one of these. This is probably a better square because it's more accurate, and it's not going to move. So it's securely fixed with 4 brass pins here. This one is pretty accurate as well, but it's got more features because you can use it as a ruler. As you can see, it goes from 1 to 305 millimeters, and it slides up and down. So you can use it as a, you can set it like this, and you can mark a line parallel to an edge with it, like that there. It has a little level on it, which is sort of useful if you're trying to level something small. Don't try and level anything long or big with this, but it's good for holding it level, holding something small level. And you can also use this as a depth stop, so you can set it to a certain depth, and you can let this, if I show you on here, you can let it protrude down from an edge, and if you want to just put a little mark, you can use that as a depth stop. Quite handy when you're installing doors and cutting out door hinges and things like that. It also has the 45-degree angle on it, so you've got 90 degrees and 45 degrees. So it's a much more versatile tool than the tri-square. If you can afford both, then by all means, but get this one first. So that's the tri-square, the combination square, sorry. Next thing is a tape measure, and I think it's worth getting a decent tape measure as well. This is a 5 metre. You could get a 7.5 metre or an 8 metre. Tape measures, good ones do tend to be quite expensive. You could pay £25 for a tape measure, but it will be worth it because it's a thing that you will use day in, day out. It's a very well used tool, and it's really essential for any work, more or less. So yep, definitely a tape measure. No less than 5 metres. 5 metres or 7.5 or 8 metres I think is best. So next thing is a decent set of screwdrivers. So I've got some screwdrivers here just to show you. So you want ones with different sizes of heads. So we've got long screwdrivers here and we've got stubby ones. And you want a selection of Posey drive and Phillips 1, Phillips 2, slotted. As I say, stubby and long. You maybe even want longer screwdrivers than that. You might want needle precision screwdrivers if you're looking to tighten very small screws, such as in a pair of glasses or in a watch. You might need to loosen some very small screws. But get a decent set of screwdrivers, spend a bit of money on screwdrivers, and get maybe a pack of 12 or say 15 screwdrivers. And so that's screwdrivers. That's the next essential tool. Next thing is a adjustable wrench, or shifting spanner as it's sometimes called. This is just a 200mm or 8-inch shifting spanner, which is good for getting into tight corners. It's good if you're doing plumbing work or just generally tightening, loosening nuts. But if you can manage get a slightly bigger one, get maybe a 250mm one or even a 300mm one, just because it's a longer handle, so you get a bit more leverage with it, and obviously it'll open further. So this one opens to about, it's about 25mm that opens to. There's actually a scale on the spanner, which isn't always there, but this one's got a little measuring scale on it. 25mm. So if you were to get a 250mm one, it might open to 30mm or maybe more, which can always be handy. So that's a definite essential tool. Again, maybe not as critical to spend so much on a shifting spanner. Just spend what you can afford, because you can pay a lot of money for these. You can pay 50 or £60 just for one. So I don't advise that, but certainly don't buy the cheapest either. Just something in the middle would be quite nice. So that's the next tool. Next thing's just a simple knife blade, Stanley knife or just a cut-off knife like this. Very handy for lots of different things, from sharpening pencils to cutting wallpaper to everything in between. You can slice bits off of the edge of wood with this, or so many different things, cutting up rags, cloths for doing oiling work. If you're using stains or oils, a knife blade is so handy to have. If you can afford a Stanley knife, then get a Stanley knife. If not, just get a little cut off, break off blade like this. That's the next tool. Next thing is a pair of long nose pliers. Get long nose because they're more versatile than other types of pliers. You can get side cutting pliers, end cutting pliers, and just combination pliers, which are all good pliers, are all useful, but I think these probably do a bit of everything. The long nose is great for getting into very tight spots and maybe tightening nuts or loosening screws or pulling nails out. and also you can use them as a cutter if you want to cut a nail, for example, or if you want to cut a piece of wire, piece of electrical wire or fencing wire or whatever. You could do that. Maybe wouldn't cut fencing wire, but certainly you could use that as a form of cutter. So that would be the next essential tool, worth spending a little bit of money on. Again, I wouldn't go too crazy on it, but spend just the best you can afford. So that's the next tool. Next one is preferably a large hacksaw, not a junior hacksaw, if you can afford it. A junior hacksaw is okay, but it's a little bit harder to hold, and it will take longer to cut. So if you're cutting a lot of metal or plastic pipe or things like that, then definitely invest in a large hacksaw. The best thing to do is actually just to buy a cheap hacksaw and just buy a decent blade for it. There's not a lot of point in spending a lot of money on a very expensive hacksaw frame and an expensive blade, because as long as the frame is rigid enough, as long as you put a decent blade in it, it will be a decent hacksaw. So hacksaw, another essential tool. Again, just the best you can afford, but not too crazy. You can get a hacksaw decent for round about £5 or £6, and you can buy a very decent blade for about £1. So no need to go too crazy on that. Okay, so second last tool here. This is number 9, and just a claw hammer. So this is a standard claw, the claw that most people are familiar with. You do get another type of claw hammer, which is known as a ripping claw. As you can see, if I show you the two, this one is a lot more curved than this one, and what this is actually used for, hence the name, it's used for it's used for ripping. So it's good for pulling out nails. If I can show you a sort of demonstration, if I wanted to pull this nail out, it's got a bigger point of leverage. So basically, if I was to use this one, you know, the handle, because the claw isn't as curved, it's got more leverage to pull things out, and also it can be used for sort of like if you had some brickwork or mortar that you had to chip out, you can use the claw for that. Whereas this is very difficult to do that with, because the claw, you would have to be, you know, your hand would be right in at the wall trying to do it with that. So it's good for demolition work. It's good for taking down old partitions and door frames and things like that, because you can just go in and, you know, hit it like that, and your hand is well away from the work. So in terms of a hammer, I would suggest getting a decent hammer as well. This is actually called a Plum Hammer. It's made by Cooper Tools in America. I don't actually think you can buy them anymore. This is also a Plum Hammer, but it's I think this one's slightly older. You can see it's a fiberglass shaft, and I think you can see that the fiberglass is actually starting to turn a bit pink. That's just with age and weather and being outside. This one's still quite reddy coloured. This one's a bit more pink, so still doesn't affect the use. It's just weathering over the years. But as I say, Plum Hammer. So I don't. You can buy a wooden handled hammer. You can buy a steel shaft hammer. You can buy a fiberglass hammer, whatever. But again, I would say don't buy the cheapest. Don't just spend a couple of pounds on a hammer. Buy the very best hammer you can afford, because you're going to use it a lot, and there's no point in risking buying a hammer that's made of cheap steel and bits are going to fly off and hit you in the face. There's no point in having that. So I would suggest spend £20 or £25 minimum on a hammer if you can afford it. But try, as with all tools, try to avoid the very cheapest. And the final tool, number 10, that I think is the essential, is spirit level. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're installing door linings, frames, putting up shelves, even hanging a picture, you more or less can't do it without a spirit level. There's the best idea is to buy the longest level you can afford. The only drawback with that is that if you're putting up a shelf, supposing there's two, there might be what we call a half it on either side, like a side that's supposing it's like inside a cupboard or something like that. If you've got a very long level, you might not be able to fit the level in. So in that case, it's a bit of a hindrance buying a longer level. In that case, you would have to sort of improvise and try and use a smaller level or something else to level with. But try and buy the best level, because the more money you spend on a level, the more accurate it'll be, the less tolerance there'll be, and it'll just be generally better. If you were to drop it, for example, a more expensive level is not as likely to break or go faulty as a less expensive level. And as I say, try and buy the longest one you can, because if you're doing work outside and if you were building a big shed, for example, and you needed to level the whole floor or for something like that, you'd be wanting as long a level as possible, because the longer the level is, generally the more accurate it is. If you use a very small level, like a small torpedo level, then it's not giving you a true representation, because you're only leveling one very small part. So if there's any bumps or sort of like undulations, if you like, over the course of the work, then a longer level will just run over them, whereas a smaller level will follow the bumps, if you like. The other thing you can do is buy a short level, and you can actually get a long piece of wood. Just make sure the wood is very, very straight, and you can just set the level on top of the piece of wood, and that more or less acts as a longer level, but it has to be a dead straight piece of wood or else it won't work. So that's my top 10 tools that I think is required by the DIYer. So I hope you found that useful, and I will see you again in the next video.